years now, EU Masters has been the stage where everything is possible. We get to meet new players, but also more experienced players get to make their redemption. This is the place where stories begin, or new chapters are written. In spring, we got to crown a new champion. Carmine Corp was the most beautiful Cinderella story we ever had in France, going from second division to winning the LFL and crushing the EU Masters within 6 months. And today, they look to do it again and confirm the LFL supremacy in 2021. In summer, KC had to rebuild after the Petit Prince de la top lane left for greater things with Fnatic in the LEC. We were all wondering if the magic within K-Corp would be strong enough to persist with Adangon. We were wondering who could have the shoulders and strength to take his place. Carmine has always been a resourceful team, and just like that, they brought Cabochard back from the forgotten. It didn't take long for K-Corp to prove that in the LFL, they would stay a force to be reckoned with. This summer was all about making history, because for the very first time ever, Spring winners will play to defend their title. For the first time ever, we will have the same IRLs battling for revenge. Both teams will fight to defend the pride of the LFL and the NLC.
2021 has seen the rise of the NLC in Europe, but it hasn't always been like that for Fnatic Rising. The most successful year for Fnatic Rising so far was back in 2019, 2 whole years ago, where the team reached semi-finals back-to-back in both spring and summer, but that is where their journey was cut short twice. Fnatic Rising has had a difficult 2021 season, with Spring finding them second in the NLC, unable to even make it out of play-ins in that split's European Masters. 2021 Spring wasn't much different, as Fnatic Rising were faced with their biggest challenge yet. Veteran mid laner Febiven retired halfway through the NLC split, and 18-year-old rookie Dayer was introduced to step into his shoes. What are the chances, everyone said, that someone with so little competitive experience can be the difference maker? Half a split of competitive play later and countless of Montas-worthy plays, Dayer finds himself in the European Masters Finals. Fnatic Rising have broken the first curse of never making finals. Can they join teams like Big and others for the legendary Plains to Champions run? This is the sole remaining representative of the NLC. Can they do what BTXL could not in spring? Can they break the second curse after the history repeats itself and they will have to face Carmine Corp for the trophy?
The game one. I feel like I was watching the LPL, but that's something you did actually.
I loved every second. I was like, I'm home. I'm finally home.
Oh.
It was so good. But I love to see it, right? This is kind of the early aggression we expected when you look at like how these two teams like to play.
I didn't know where I should look at the beginning of the game. Actually, was it from top side? Was it from the bot lane? Can you talk me through the early action trouble?
I felt like I could not control what was happening on the map. Fnatic had a really good read overall on the map. They would a lot of times ditch the mid wave with Dayer and they would try to play for side lane. I think shutting down Cabochard was a really clever plan, because we always see that Cabochard will create these plays later on in teamfights. He's absolutely stellar. So shutting down his Renekton early on, you make sure that he doesn't get to scale that much faster. And then you put Pride ahead, you get Dayer ahead, and all Gucci. The early game went great for Fnatic Rising until a lot of their players were overextending. A lot of them had shutdowns on them, so the gold really quickly shifted over to Carmine Corp.
Yeah, I think Fnatic did a really good job of understanding how to use the Twisted Fate versus the Rise, right? Like, there were so many times where like, hey, we just have that movement faster to get to the top side. You're actually going to see it in this play here, right? You see Seiken stuck in the mid lane. He's trying to wear on more across, but Fnatic Rising are just able to get there faster. And traditionally, you would like to try and find these skirmishes, especially with a set support, because he's so good. He provides just as much CC alongside Leona, but that true damage can make such a big difference. But unfortunately, because you're that little bit late to the party with the Rise, it means you don't really have that opportunity. And when they got to the later portion, this was a big moment for me that we saw the Jarvan first pick. Jarvan pays dividends against these compositions that Fnatic Rising are running, because look, you want to try and play it with sidelines with the Twisted Fate, the Gnar you've just set up for success, but Jarvan is so damn good at engaging from so far away that when you've got this immobile AD carry like the Varus, you now have to try and group around him. Otherwise, this Jarvan will find great engages, set up for an Ezreal, set up for the set to come across the top, and it made it nigh on impossible for Fnatic Rising to try and play at these side lanes.
And I feel like this is where Fnatic Rising was a little bit shaky, to try and understand how the Jarvan engages worked against them, because it felt like Yeah, that was nutty. It felt like they were just not respecting the fact that Bean would be under trouble, Dayer would be under trouble because they're both very immobile. And I saw Rux in a lot of cases. He was trying to overreach, try to find Mati, who's also running cleanse, who's playing the Edgel, very slippery with the E, with the flash. So suddenly Rux would end up on the complete opposite side of the team fight where nobody from Fnatic Rising could reach. And then Dayer and Bean would be absolutely demolished by the Renekton and the Jarvan. And I'm like, this is where you kind of have to weigh your situation and starting to pivot. Do I need to stick back with my DC and allow Maxi and Pride to overextend the two Fed Bruisers to try and deal with the backline of Carmine Corp, or do I go all the way in? Because for me, I felt like maybe the bot lane of Fnatic Rising was a little bit shaky.
Yeah, and they were the key factor during the previous series against Misfit Femir. So I thought that with the composition that they had everything in hand for things to go smoothly. Because when you look at both teams, this is comfort comps right there.
Yep.
So what did it come down to?
He will say the Jarvan, I'll say they managed to deal really well with the Jarvan in the early game. They figured out what the champion wants to do, and then they started overextending. Shutdown onto Pride, bunch of shutdowns onto Dayor. You lose the pressure, you lose a bunch of gold you've accumulated, and then you allow Carmine Corp to figure out exactly how they want to come at you, because so far in this early game, it hasn't necessarily worked for them. So figuring out that they have to brute force on you, seeing Rux on the back, and they're like, it's fine, we'll let Mati deal with him, and then we can do the rest. And I felt like Cabo and Syncroft were two big pivotal factors on why this game went to the side of Carmine Corp.
Yeah, I think there was obviously the Jarvan was a big factor for me. I think he had these great engages that made it very hard for Fnatic Rising to actually operate. But I think as well, as you said, like Dayor just overextending a lot of these fights. Like whatever about the Jarvan, a lot of times he was just getting caught out by Seiken's Rise. Like that was the lockdown that was actually hitting him. So I think mispositioning a little bit on the Twisted Fate, which gave the opportunity for the picks to come through for Carmine Corp and set up these fights. And honestly, if you're just going to go head to head in these fights, Rise does better than Twisted Fate. They kind of do a similar job in the early stages somewhat, but certainly an AoE team fight like Rise is going to win you far harder than something like this Twisted Fate.
Yeah, and we saw that during a couple of fights. I'm talking especially about the Baron setup here, Trouble. I know you were hurt watching this. 3v5, K-Corp managing to turn it around. How did they do it? Maybe we can watch the replay here. But I was baffled that K-Corp was able to win this fight, even though Fnatic Rising had the position here.
I'm glad we're watching this fight, because this shows everything that went wrong for Fnatic Rising. Dayor overextending, you're losing your Twisted Fate very early on. Pride is gonna TP in, try to get something down. Really good flashes at knee from Xmati and Seiken. And you see Rux isolated on the very back while Bean is trying to stay alive versus a Jarvan and versus a Renekton, which is not happening. Now, the big factor here is Maxi. Maxi is doing such a great job. It gave me, honestly, goosebumps from the inspired pentakill. He kills the Renekton. If he manages to click onto that Renekton soul, we were going to have probably another pentakill moment from a Viego. But all in all, again, Carmine Corp, they found their targets and they executed on that.
Yeah, I think what this fight shows, though, was something that we saw really well done by Carmine Corp is playing around their vision, right? You see Fnatic Rising trying to establish vision control in that top side, but Carmine Corp play around it, make sure they're on several pink wards. They don't spot Seiken able to attach himself on towards Dayor. And so many times throughout this game, there was just like, okay, we know Viego's not in the vicinity. We know that Pride has no TP bot. They'd actually done an incredibly good job of timing that summoner spell to a T. And it meant that when you got in towards these fights, they already knew where everyone was and how quickly they could enact their game plan before Fnatic Rising could put up a defense.
I do want to touch on the adaptation that we are looking for in this best of 5 series, because we know that Fnatic picked the red side for the next game, which means they're going to have last pick. Where do you see improvements for both teams?
I believe that Fnatic Rising can win with the exact same composition they just drafted. I'd say if they are willing to rinse and repeat, maybe ban the Jarvan out so you don't necessarily have to deal with it, because I feel like it was big trouble for being in the backline trying to deal with all this backline dive. Maybe ban the Jarvan out, but I feel like the Varus is a pretty popular pick for Fnatic Rising. It's like probably his most comfortable champion. I just felt like it was a little bit shaky he'll be shaky by Dayer. Maybe nerves are coming in playing against, the Spring 2021 champions. But I feel if you want to rinse and repeat and run it back, Fnatic Rising, you can. Same thing for Carmine Corp. You got all your comfort champions. You've got Seiken onto the Rise, went absolutely nuts. Mati onto that Ezra was huge as well. just run it back.
Yeah, I think the only difference for me is I don't want to see the Viego. Not that I dislike Viego, he's stupidly strong. But I think a lot of this series is going to be defined by the early stages, and it's why we're seeing the first pick Jarvan, when you got Xin Zhao and Lee Sin taken off the board, denies the Olaf pick coming across on the other side as well. So I think higher priority on these early game picks in the jungle is going to make it a little bit easier for both sides.
We talked about the map movements for both teams, how it was important, especially during semifinals for both these teams. Who was the more proactive team and why so far? And yeah, where can the other one do it better?
I felt Fnatic Rising had the most proactive early game.
I agree.
But that is also due to the Twisted Fate, right? He had the teleport, he also had Destiny, and I felt like a lot of times Dayo would ditch a wave mid lane completely just to make sure that he's there in time for a play, and these are some sacrifices that you have to make to get your team ahead. So I felt like Fnatic Rising had the proactive early, but Karma Corp completely decrypted the code, and they found a way to engage.
Yeah, and I think that's the big one for me is like you've got pushing bot, right? You get the own out onto the map first. She's actually able to make plays alongside that Twisted Fate. So it becomes a hell of a lot easier if you're Fnatic Rising to make these early plays, but you do get to a point where you're like, right, if we want to try and play it through side lanes, it becomes incredibly difficult. You do win the mid push in the 1-3-1 scenario, but if you ever try to overextend to take a wave, then you've got the Jarvan who's jumping in on top of you. You've got a lot of things that are coming your direction, and I think it just was too much to handle, and it's why like we praised Fnatic Rising for their ability to play at the map and cross map coming in from the semi-finals, particularly in game number 5, but you just don't have that opportunity to go for it this time around, and I think it really stumped them, and I think it's really smart from Karmine Corp. Their biggest issue coming into this that I could kind of see from the gameplay was not really knowing how to play the map, not really playing 1-3-1, but they just went, look, we know if we try to play this game, Fnatic Rising will win, let's just shut it down, let's just go for the Jarvan and make sure we can win this out.
Yeah, let's stop them from playing their game, and we'll see what both teams can come up with for the rest of the series. I will see you for game 2 in just a few minutes.
Champions!